Assalamu alaikum doctors. Today our topic of discussion is on menstrual cycle, which is also called as menses. It is also known as periods. So before discussing menstrual cycle in detail, it is important that we have a just recap on sexual characteristic, and after that inshallah we will be discussing the menstrual cycle. So let's discuss the sexual characteristic. So sexual characteristic is broadly categorized into two parts, that is primary sexual characteristic and secondary sexual characteristic. Primary sexual characteristic presents at birth like genitalia, while secondary sexual characteristic presents later on in the life like puberty. So what is puberty? It is the time when one becomes functionally able to procreate. How will you define the puberty? It is the time when one becomes functionally able to procreate. And actually puberty links the childhood with the adulthood. Now, what is the puberty age in the female? Now, puberty age in female, that is from 10 to 16 years, while reproductive age for the female is from 15 to 45 years. Puberty age means that it is the time when female attain the puberty, and reproductive age means it is the time when female is able to conceive. So don't forget the point. The puberty age in the female is from 10 to 16 years, while reproductive age in the female it ranges from 15 to 45 years. Now, what are the signs of puberty? What are the signs of puberty? Now, the first sign of puberty, that is called as telarche. Telarche is the first sign of puberty, and after telarche there is adrenarche and pubarche. And from pubarche there is growth spurt, and at the last there is menarche. So telarche occur normally in 9 to 10 years, while adrenarche and pubarche it occur in 10 to 11 years, while growth spurt it occur in 11 to 12 years, while menarche occur in 12 to 13 years. Now, this is the normal pattern of the puberty. So the first sign of puberty, that is called as telarche. Telarche means the development of breast budding, and telarche is the first sign of puberty. Now after telarche there is adrenarche. Adrenarche means the development of the axillary hairs, while pubarche is the development of the pubic hairs. Now it is the second sign of the puberty, while the third sign of puberty, that is called as growth spurt. Growth spurt means increase in the height of the female. So growth spurt means increase in the height, and they will usually ask you that which kind of hormone helps in the growth spurt. So your answer will be definitely that is estrogen. So estrogen helps in the growth spurt. Which hormone helps in the growth spurt? That is estrogen. Now, at the last sign of puberty, that is called as menarche. Menarche is called as first menstruation. So actually, it is the first menstruation around the age of 13. So here we will be discussing the menstruation in detail. So it's just an overview regarding puberty. Now let's move toward the menstruation. That actually what is menstruation is. So menstruation is also called menses. It is also called periods. Now, menstruation actually it is a term that is derived from the mensum. Menstrual is a term derived from the mensum. Actually it is a Latin word which means each month. So in menstrual cycle there is uterine and ovarian changes occur in each month. But how you will properly define the menstrual cycle or periods? Now let's discuss the proper definition of the menses or periods. How will you define the periods? So actually periods are the normal shedding of endometrium in the form of bleeding through cervix and vagina, followed by invisible interplay of hormones, mainly HPO-axis. Now, how will you define the periods? Periods are the normal shedding of endometrium. So as you know that in the uterus there are three layers. Outer layer is called perimetrium, middle layer is called myometrium, while inner layer is called endometrium. So in the menstrual cycle, the periods are actually the normal shedding of endometrium in the form of bleeding through outflow tract from the cervix and vagina, followed by invisible interplay of hormones, mainly HPO-axis. So before discussing menstrual cycle in detail, it is important that you have a sound knowledge of HPO-axis. That actually by HPO-axis, what actually I want to say. So HPO-axis, what does HPO-axis mean? Now it is important concept. Now HPO stands for the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. It is hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. Now look, say if there is a special endocrine glands by name that is called as hypothalamus. Now hypothalamus, it secretes a specific hormone by name that is called as GnRH, that is stand for the gonadotrophin releasing hormone. So hypothalamus release the gonadotrophin releasing hormones, and this gonadotrophin releasing hormone GnRH, it acts on the anterior pituitary gland. It acts on anterior pituitary gland. Now as you know that, say if this is a pituitary gland, so there is anterior lobe of pituitary gland and there is posterior lobe of pituitary gland. So from the posterior lobe of pituitary gland, it release the ADH, which is also called vasopressin, and it is also release the oxytocin. While from the anterior lobe of pituitary gland, it release various hormones in the form of prolactin, in the form of growth hormone, which is also called somatotropic hormone. It releases the thyroid stimulating hormone. It also releases the adrenocorticotropic hormone, and it also releases the follicle stimulating hormone or luteinizing hormone. Now I told you that pituitary gland consists of two lobes, anterior lobe and posterior lobe. So from posterior lobe it releases the ADH and oxytocin, while from anterior lobe it releases various hormones in the form of prolactin, growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. But here we are going to concern with only two hormones, that is follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, FSH and LH. Now this FSH and LH, it act on the ovary. It act on the ovary. Now what are the main function of FSH and LH? Now this FSH, that stands for follicle stimulating hormone, it act on ovarian follicles. It act on ovarian follicles and stimulate the follicular growth and maturation. FSH acts on ovarian follicles and it stimulates the follicular growth and follicular maturation. Now another very important question is, they will ask you where does the FSH receptor is present. So your answer will be definitely the FSH receptor, it is present, FSH receptor present in the granulosa cells, and in turn this granulosa cell, it will help in the estrogen production. It helps in the estrogen production. Now, FSH act on ovarian follicles, stimulate the follicular growth and maturation. Where does the FSH receptor is present? FSH receptor present in the granulosa cell. Ultimately, it helps in the estrogen production. While talking about the LH, that is luteinizing hormone, this luteinizing hormone, it helps in the ovulation. Now, the another question is, where does the LH receptor is present? So your answer will be LH receptor present in the theca interna cells, and ultimately it helps in the androgen production. Now, LH helps in the ovulation. LH receptor present in the theca interna cell, and in turn it helps in the androgen production. Now, this whole axis is called a HPO axis, which means hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, and this axis is very important. And for the normal menstruation, it is very important that this HPO axis should be well coordinated. If by any means, if this HPO axis is not working properly, or if there is even a single endocrine gland is not working properly out of hypothalamus, pituitary and ovary, so in that condition that there will be no normal menstruation occur. So there will be irregular menstruation there. So for the normal menstruation, it is important that the HPO axis should be well coordinated. Say if hypothalamus is working properly, but pituitary gland or ovary is not working physiologically, so at that condition there will be irregular menstrual cycle. So or if hypothalamus is working normally, but pituitary gland is not working properly, so there will be a deficiency or a low level of FSH and LH, and ultimately they will be not working properly in coming stages. So try to get this point that HPO axis is very important for the normal menstrual cycle, as normal menstrual cycle is also called eumenorrhea. So HPO axis contain hypothalamus, it contains the pituitary gland, and it contains the ovary. So for the normal menstruation, the HPO axis should be well coordinated. Now let's discuss the another very important point, that what are the criteria for the normal menstrual cycle or periods. Criteria for the normal menstrual period. Criteria for normal menstrual period. Now, I told you earlier the first important criteria for the normal menstrual period is that there will be HPO axis should be well coordinated. HPO axis should be well coordinated. So this is very important. Now, the second is the uterine endometrium. The uterine endometrium must be responsive. It must be responsive for ovarian hormones. And the third criteria is that the outflow tract, that is cervix and vagina, that is patterned. The outflow tract should be patterned. Okay, so what is the criteria for the normal menstrual period? The normal menstrual period is also called eumenorrhea. So the criteria for eumenorrhea, the first is the HPO axis should be well coordinated, point number 1. The second point is the uterine endometrium, or they should be responsive for ovarian hormones. And the third criteria for the eumenorrhea, that is that the outflow tract should be patterned, that is cervix and vagina. Now there are some another important points regarding menstrual period that you should know it. Now the first point is that the normal menstrual period, it is also called eumenorrhea. That is called eumenorrhea. What is eumenorrhea? It is the normal menstrual period. Now the menstrual cycle, it repeats in 26 to 30 days. So on an average you can say that is 28 days. So menstrual cycle repeat in 28 days. The another very important question is that how much blood lasts during one menstrual cycle. So blood lasts during one menstrual cycle, that is 20 to 80 ml. So on average we can say 35 ml. The another very important question is how much iron is lost during one menstrual period. So iron lasts during one menstrual period, that is 13 mg. Now, as we discussed earlier, that the reproductive age in female that is from 15 to 45 year, and it is also documented that in one year there is 13 menses cycle in female. So in 1 year there is 13 menses cycle in female. So suppose if female attain the age of 30 year, if there is 30 year lady, so in 30 year she would be likely passing 400 menses cycle. So the important point is the normal menstrual period is also called eumenorrhea. The cycle repeats in 26 to 30 days. So on average we can say 28 days. How many blood lasts during one menstrual cycle? That is 20 to 80 ml, which is around about 35 ml on average. And how much iron lasts during one menstrual period? That is 13 mg. Now, the reproductive age in the female is 15 to 45 year. Reproductive age means that it is the time when female is able to conceive. So, reproductive age is 15 to 45 year, and in 1 year it is documented that there is 13 menses cycle. So suppose if female attain the age of 30 year, so in that condition and that timing she would be likely passing from 400 menses cycle. So student, that's all about the menstrual cycle overview. Now let's discuss the phases of menstrual cycle, that how many phases are there in menses cycle. So menstrual cycle, it is divided into two cycles further. Menstrual cycle is divided into two cycles further. The first is called ovarian cycle, and the second is uterine cycle. Uterine cycle, which is also called endometrial cycle. Now, ovarian cycle consists of the follicular phase and luteal phase. Now, remember this, that follicular phase, it is also called as estrogen phase, and luteal phase, it is also called as progesterone phase. Now, the follicular phase, it is from 0 to 14 days, while luteal phase, it is from 15 to 28 days. Now, coming toward the uterine cycle, it consists of three phases further. The first is proliferative phase. The second is secretory phase, which is also called preparatory phase, and the third is menstrual phase, which is also called as bleeding phase. Now, menstrual cycle is divided into two cycles further, that is ovarian cycle and uterine cycle. Ovarian cycle consists of follicular phase and luteal phase. So follicular phase is also called estrogen phase, while luteal phase is also called progesterone phase. Estrogen phase, it is from 0 to 14 days, while progesterone phase from 15 to 28 days. While uterine cycle consists of proliferative phase, secretory phase, which is also called preparatory phase, and menstrual phase, which is also called bleeding phase. Now look, there is very important concept. Now if there is follicular phase is continue in the ovarian cycle, so at the same time the proliferative phase will be continue in the uterine cycle. At the same time, similar fashion, if the luteal phase continue with the ovarian cycle, so simultaneously the secretory phase will be continue in the uterine cycle. It is very important concept. Please recall this concept, that these both cycles, they are correlated with each other, and actually it is the ovarian cycle which determine the uterine events. So I will repeat it once again. Whenever the follicular phase is running in the ovarian cycle, so at the same time the proliferative phase will be continue in the uterine cycle. In a similar fashion, if luteal phase is continue in the ovarian cycle, so the secretory phase will be continue in the uterine cycle. So it means the ovarian events and uterine events, they are correlated with each other, and basically it is the ovarian events which determine the uterine events. So please pay attention to these points. Now let's understand the ovarian cycle. Now this ovarian cycle, it initiated by a specific hormones that is called as FSH. Now FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. As we discussed earlier, it is released from the anterior lobe of pituitary gland on stimulation by stimulation of hypothalamus. Now what this FSH do? This FSH, it act on the ovarian follicles. It act on ovarian follicles and stimulate the follicular growth and maturation. And as we discussed earlier, the FSH, it released from the anterior lobe, and by stimulation of hypothalamus, this FSH, it act on the ovarian follicles and stimulate the follicular growth and maturation. Now what is basically follicles? What are the follicles? Now where does these follicles are located in the ovary? So these follicles, it is located in the ovarian cortex. The ovarian follicles, these follicles are located in the cortex of ovary. As you know that the normal structure of ovary, say this is a normal structure of the ovary. Now this is a hilum of the ovary, and there is a layer in the ovary, and that layer is called as germinal epithelial layer. And this germinal epithelial layer, it consists of single layer of cuboidal cells. It consists of single layer of cuboidal cells. So there is another layer on ovary as well, and that layer is called as visceroperitoneal layer. That is called as visceroperitoneal layer. And deep to the germinal epithelium, there is another layer. There is another layer as well. Deep to the germinal epithelium, there is another layer, and that is called as tunica albuginea. Now in the center, we draw an imaginary line. So in the center there will be ovarian medulla, and these are called ovarian cortex. So what I am trying to say, that is that these follicles, they are embedded in the ovarian cortex. These follicles, they are embedded in ovarian cortex, but they are not located in the ovarian medulla. And these ovarian follicles, they become mature, and there is development occur in the follicle and the ovarian cortex, not in ovarian medulla. So the follicles are located in the cortex of the ovary. Now initially there is primordial follicles. So we say if the fetus is female baby, so at round about at 5 months, the number of primordial follicles, they are round about 7 million. When baby fetus is at womb of the lady, so at 5 months, so the number of primordial follicles, that is 7 million. But at the time of birth, the number of primordial follicles, it become 2 million. While at the stage of puberty, it becomes 4 lakh, and if it lead to the stage of menopause, so the number of primordial follicles is decreases further up to 10,000, even less than 10,000. So the number of primordial follicles when the baby fetus is at womb at 5 months, that is 7 million, while at time of birth there is the number of follicles become 2 million, while at puberty stage it becomes 4 lakh, while at menopause stage the number of primordial follicles it is less than 10,000. Now initially there is primordial follicles, and from primordial follicles it convert into primary follicles, and then it convert into early secondary follicles. Early secondary follicles convert into secondary follicles, which is also called antral follicles, and this secondary follicles is converted into tertiary follicles, and ultimately this tertiary follicles it convert into mature Graafian follicles. Now I'm not going to concern with that how actually it changed from one state to another state, but here you just remember that the primordial follicles convert into primary follicles convert into the early secondary follicles, early secondary follicles convert into secondary follicles, tertiary follicles, and ultimately mature Graafian follicles. Now the point is that these are the mature Graafian follicles which helps in the production of, yes, it helps in the production of the estrogen. Now the mature Graafian follicles has a capacity to produce the estrogen. Now what does this estrogen do further? So there are three most important function of estrogen in this phase. And what are those important function of estrogen? That are, yes, is say what are the main function of estrogens. Mature Graafian follicles it produce the estrogen. Now these estrogen they play a very important role. And what are the main function of estrogen? So one of the most important function of estrogen is that it has a negative feedback on FSH. It has a negative feedback on FSH, that is follicle stimulating hormone. And what is the significance of it? So that no more FSH release further in upcoming condition, so that it decrease the FSH level further and not to stimulate the follicular growth and maturation exceeding level. So it has a negative feedback mechanism on the FSH. Now another important function is that it rush to the uterus. It rush to uterus, bring proliferatory changes, and uterine endometrium. And as we discussed earlier, that it is actually the ovarian events which determine the uterine events. Actually, those point we can correlate with this point, that these estrogen it rush to the uterus, bring proliferatory changes in the uterine endometrium. While the third, one of the most important function of the estrogen, that is that it has a positive feedback on the, yes, LH. So it is one of the most important function of the estrogen. So it has a negative feedback on FSH, it rushes to uterus, bring proliferatory changes in uterine endometrium. While the most important function is that it has a positive feedback on LH, that is luteinizing hormone. It means that it stimulates the luteinizing hormone. And as we discussed earlier, where does the LH receptor is present? The LH receptor is present at the theca internal cell, which helps in the androgen production. Now, it has a positive feedback on luteinizing hormone, and the luteinizing hormone ultimately it is involved in the, yes, it causes the ovulation. It causes the ovulation, and this ovulation, they will ask you at which day the ovulation occur. That is 14th day. Now another important point is that in the ovulation, at the time of ovulation, in some females they usually feel a pain, and that pain is called as metal Swammer's pain. Maybe I am wrong in the spell mistake, so you can Google it as well. So at the time of ovulation, female offer a pain that is called as Menstrual pain, which is also called as mid-cyclic pain. It is also called as mid-cycle pain. So estrogen has a positive feedback on LH. It means estrogen helps and stimulation of LH more and more, and this is what we are called as, yes, LH surge. This is called as LH surge, which is also called LH peak. Now the very important question they will ask you, how much concentration of estrogen is required for the LH surge. So the concentration of estrogen that is required for LH surge is 200 picogram per ml. Now the another important question is that how will you find the ovulation day in the female? So you can easily find out the ovulation day in the female by measuring the length of menstrual cycle minus 14 days. So let's suppose if a female has a menstrual cycle of 28 days, so you will put 28 here and you will ultimately find the result. So at 14 days there is ovulation occur. So that is the way how to find out the ovulation day in the female. Now what actually this LH do? When it has a positive feedback on LH, so ultimately this LH act on mature Graafian follicles and it ruptured the mature Graafian follicles. It ruptured the mature Graafian follicles. So what happens that primary oocyte it convert into the secondary oocyte, and this is what we are called as ovulation. What is ovulation? It is the release of secondary oocyte. So what happens? LH act on mature Graafian follicles, it ruptures the mature Graafian follicles, and as a result of this, the primary oocyte it convert into secondary oocyte, and this release of secondary oocyte that is called as ovulation. Now, when secondary oocyte is released, when secondary oocyte release, so the remaining products that are there, that is called as corpus luteum. Now LH act on mature Graafian follicles and it ruptured the mature Graafian follicles and it convert the primary oocyte into the secondary oocyte. Now the release of this secondary oocyte is known as ovulation. Now when secondary oocyte released, so remaining products, so the remaining products after that is called as corpus luteum, and actually from the onward there is another phase get started, and that is called as luteal phase. That is called as luteal phase. Now when corpus luteum form, so from onward the luteal phase is constant phase. It is called as constant phase. It is of 14 days from 15 to 28. There is the important role here of corpus luteum. Now, what is actually that is called as, yes, that is SCG and LH, luteinizing hormone. important hormones are released from the it secrete mainly progesterone. Mainly it secrete progesterone. It also release the estrogen, also release the inhibin A, and also release the relaxin. So which type it maintain the pregnancy, and that's the reason that sometimes it is called as maintenance hormone. The secretory changes, it bring the secretory changes and the uterine endometrium. So it occur. So what happens? There is no fertilization, and if there is fertilization, so the corpus luteum, it convert into corpus luteum menstrualis, and corpus luteum menstrualis into corpus luteum albicans. Now corpus luteum menstrualis, it is a red color bodies. It is a red color bodies, while corpus luteum albicans white color bodies. It is white color bodies. So convert into corpus luteum verum, and this corpus luteum verum, it remain there for 3 months till placenta develop. Grown cycle and the luteal phase of the Ovarian cycle. Now let's starting with the another cycle of cycle. Uterine cycle, which is also called endometrial cycle. Now the another cycle is uterine cycle or endometrial. The cyclic changes in the endometrium, it is due to the ovarian hormones. The cyclic changes in uterine endometrium is due to ovarian hormones. And because of the involvement of uterine endometrium, it is also called as endometrial cycle. Now, let's suppose this is a uterus. Now, if this is a uterus, so uterus consists of three layers. That is called as perimetrium. The outer layer is perimetrium. The inner layer is called as myometrium, while the innermost layer, that is called as endometrium. Now, in the endometrium layer, it is divided into two layers further. That is called as zona basilis, which is also called stratum basilis, and the another layer is called zona compacta, which is also called as stratum compacta. Now, zona basilis or stratum basilis, it is closely associated with the myometrium. So it is adhesive. Their adhesion is with the myometrium, and actually the changes during menstrual cycle that but not in zona basilis. So there it is the layer where there is no changes. But another hand, zona compacta is a very important layer where all the cyclic changes that occur in uterine. It is zona compacta. It is also called, while zona basilis is also. Now, what are the phases of uterine cycle, which is also called endometrial cycle? So, three layers. Second is secretory phase, which is also called preparatory phase, and the third is menstrual phase, which is also called bleeding phase. Now, by proliferative phase, there is active proliferation and uterine endometrium. So, in the proliferative thickness, it is increases further up to the 1 to 4 millimeter. So here the thickness increases to the 1 to 4 millimeter. It is due to the influence of estrogen. It is under the influence of the estrogen, and actually this is estrogen. It actually hyperplasia. So here there is hyperplasia of endometrial cells. Hyperplasia of endometrial cells, and ultimately it causes the proliferation. Now, while the second phase is called secretory phase, and actually that condition, carpus luteum secrete the progesterone mainly. Also, it secrete the estrogen and having A and relaxin. Now, here this estrogen, it helps in the proliferation of the estrogen. In this phase, it helps in the proliferation of the uterine endometrium. Now, in proliferative phase, the endometrial thickness is further increased up to the 5 to 8 millimeter. So it is very important. Now here the progesterone level, actually what does actually this progesterone helps and changes in here, it helps in the secretory changes in uterine endometrium. So progesterone, already we discussed progesterone because it changes endometrium. It actually is the it increase the secretion in the stroma of endometrium. Carpus luteum degeneration occur. There is carpus luteum degeneration occur. So, carpus luteum degenerated, so all the various hormones like in the form of estrogen and progesterone, it is decreased. They are and there is irreversible necrosis occur in the uterine endometrium. So when carpus but which layer of endometrium involved? Already we discussed it. There is ultimate and all menstrual blood extrude out through cervix and vagina.